Okay, time for another viewer requested video. I was recently asked if I could test a Ryzen processor with just a single DDR5 memory module, compare that to two memory modules, see how the performance is, and the comment ended up being pretty heavily upvoted. It sounded like an interesting idea. It's certainly very topical right now, so here we are. Now, if you happen to have been living under a rock for the past few weeks, but you've just recently come out to build a brand new gaming PC, I've got some bad news for you. DRAM pricing has gone a bit crazy, as it tends to do from time to time, and this time we're looking at over a 100% price increase. For example, the G-Skill Trident Z5 Neo RGB 32GB kit of DDR5 6000 CL30 memory that we recommend for AM5 builds, that's jumped up from $120 US just 2 weeks ago now to an eye-watering $270 US, 125% price hike. And this insane price increase has clearly got more than a few of you thinking, do you really need 2 sticks of RAM? After all, most games still play fine with 16GB of RAM, so how much performance are you actually sacrificing when you go from dual channel to single channel memory? Well, today we'll be answering that exact question, but before we get into it, this portion of today's video is sponsored by NZXT's Performance Fans, designed to combine premium cooling performance, impressive visuals, and ease of installation all in one. The fan frame and blades are constructed from a liquid crystal polymer, an advanced plastic that's much stiffer and more heat resistant than materials typically used in PC fans. This stiffness means the blades and frame don't flex or warp, even at high speeds and elevated temperatures, keeping airflow consistent and reducing vibration-related noise. Moreover, because liquid crystal polymer is so strong and precise when molded, the blades can be made thinner and positioned closer to the frame edges, which reduces turbulence and improves cooling efficiency. All models, even the multi-fan versions, feature just a single wire which includes a 4-pin PWM connector along with an RGB connector. All models also include aluminium side panels and subtle RGB lighting effects. Finally, all are backed by a 5-year warranty, so for more information, please click the link in the video description. Okay, so obviously there's no good solution to this problem, but if you can get away with spending, say $100, $120 right now on a single stick, rather than having to pay at least twice that for two, and then buy a second module later on when pricing inevitably drops back down, that could be a viable money-saving strategy. At the time of making this video, you could, for example, buy a single 16GB stick of Patriot Viper Elite 5 DDR5 6000 CL30 memory for $100 US. Though, if you happen to have purchased two of them together in a 32GB kit, it actually costs $255 US, so maybe buying two individual sticks is the play there. Anyway, $100 US is about what a 32GB kit cost a few weeks ago, so if you could make do with a single module for now, that would be a much cheaper alternative. So the testing in this one's pretty straightforward. I've used the Ryzen 7 9700X as the CPU, as that CPU should be representative of most of the AM5 range, excluding the X3D parts as they are less memory latency and bandwidth sensitive, though of course memory capacity can still be an issue for those CPUs. Essentially, we're combining single channel versus dual channel testing with the decks stacked in the dual channel configuration's favour, as it will have twice the memory capacity. What will remain the same though for both configurations is the memory frequency and timings. I will once again be using G-Skill's Trident Z5 Neo RGB 32GB kit, one configuration with both modules installed and then another with just a single module. So, let's get in the data. Starting with Rainbow Six Siege, we're only seeing around a 5% difference in performance between a single and two modules. And with this game being heavily CPU limited with the medium settings, that's a really good result for those hoping to just buy a single module. Essentially, the 9700X can throughput almost 500 FPS when using just a single 16GB DDR5 6000 module. The performance hit though with a single memory stick is far more significant in Battlefield 6. In this example, we're looking at around a 12% performance loss. Still, the game was very playable with just 16GB of RAM, and the 9700X was able to average over 130 FPS with 1% lows of around 90 FPS. So not bad, and certainly viable as a temporary option. Unfortunately, though, the performance hit in Marvel Rivals is pretty ugly, dropping the frame rate at 1080p from 195 FPS down to 129 FPS, and we're using the medium preset here. That said though, if you're playing at a resolution, quality settings, or using a GPU that only allows for a little over 100 FPS, then the difference in memory performance with this particular CPU is going to be a lot less substantial. And given this is a make-do type option and is only meant to be a temporary solution to the DRAM pricing crisis, it's good to know that the minimum level of performance you can expect is still very playable, and possibly still a good upgrade over your current hardware. Still, it's wild to see dual-channel memory boosting performance by 51% in this example. Next we have Horizon Zero Dawn Remastered, and here you're looking at another big drop-off in performance when using a single memory module. Performance at 1080p dropped by 33% when looking at the 1% lows, though performance overall was certainly still very playable. At 4K though, we're still looking at a 26% hit to the 1% lows, and we are using the very high quality preset in this example with an RTX 5090. Spider-Man 2 also saw a nearly 20% hit to the 1% lows at 1080p, with a 15% reduction to the average frame rate for the single channel configuration. So pretty big drop in performance there, but again, performance overall was very good and certainly highly playable. Then at 4K, the difference was much smaller, with similar 1% lows and a 12% hit to the average frame rate. Baldur's Gate 3 played pretty well with just a single memory module, though interestingly the biggest performance hit here was seen at 4K, where the 16GB configuration was up to 23% slower. At 1080p, we only saw a 10% difference, and this was also seen at 1440p, but in all of these examples, performance was still very acceptable. Avatar: Frontiers of Pandora is mostly a GPU-limited game, so the performance hit here isn't too bad, though we are still seeing the 1% lows limited to around 113 FPS, so at 1080p, the single module configuration was up to 23% slower. But by the time we reach the 4K resolution, the frame rates are well below 100 FPS, and therefore performance ends up being much the same. Arc Raiders plays quite well with just a single memory module, though like many of the other games that we've already looked at, the 1% lows take the biggest hit, dropping by 27% at 1080p, and then 20% at 1440p and 4K. The average frame rate at all three tested resolutions was much the same though, but what this data indicates is that you will notice the frame time inconsistencies more with just a single module. Next we have ACC, and this game isn't particularly memory sensitive, so playing with just a single 16GB memory module is not an issue, as you're at most sacrificing 9% performance, while still receiving over 160 FPS. When comparing the DDR4 versus DDR5 performance of the 12400F, we saw a significant improvement with DDR5 in Cyberpunk 2077. However, if we halve the available DDR5 memory bandwidth for the 9700X, it seems to have almost no effect on performance in Cyberpunk, which I have to say surprised me. Now, like ACC, Counter-Strike 2 is a game that isn't very memory sensitive, and as a result, running with one or two memory modules makes very little difference. At most, we're talking about a 5% performance loss with a single memory module. The Last of Us Part 2 Remastered ran quite well with a single memory module, though at 1080p we did see a 13% performance hit, but even so the average frame rate was still up over 150 FPS, with 1% lows exceeding 100 FPS, and this was also seen at 1440p. Then at 4K, frame rates dropped to just over 130 FPS for the average frame rate and about 110 FPS for the 1% lows, and here both configurations enabled the same level of performance, so realistically for most gamers the single memory configuration will be just fine. Finally, we have Space Marine 2, a very CPU demanding game, but even so, with just a single memory module, we were able to average around 90 FPS with 1% lows of around 70 FPS, so still very playable performance. Even so though, we are looking at up to a 22% performance loss, and interestingly, as was the case with Baldur's Gate 3, the biggest performance difference can actually be seen at the 4K resolution. Now here's the 13 game average data, calculated using the GeoMean, and at 1080p, the single stick configuration was 12% slower when comparing the average frame rate and 16% slower for the 1% lows. So not a massive difference overall, though it has to be said the results did vary quite a bit from one game to another. Now, quite interestingly, increasing the resolution to 1440p didn't really change much in this testing, though we are using an RTX 5090. In fact, it wasn't until we increased the resolution all the way up to 4K that the margins started to come down, and now the single module setup was just 9% slower when comparing the average frame rate and 13% slower for the 1% lows. So after all of that, is buying a single 16GB memory module right now, with plans of buying a second one in the future after pricing calms down, is that a good idea? Firstly, I guess we should cover what the actual savings are with this strategy. As I said at the start of the video, the 32GB G-Skill kit that we use for testing right now costs $270 US, whereas a few weeks ago it was just $120 US. Now, to my knowledge, you can't actually buy these modules individually. They're matched for kits, and we'll talk a bit more about that in a moment, but you can buy some DDR5 16GB modules individually, such as the Patriot Viper Elite 5 memory that I noted earlier on, and I also found a single 16GB stick of G-Skill's Flare X DDR5 6000 cell 36 memory for $116. So if you can buy a single 16GB module for $120 US or less, and then a second module later for half that price, you're looking at spending no more than $180 US, opposed to spending $270 US right now. That said, Newegg.com is selling V-Color's Manta DDR5 6000 CL30 32GB kits for $220 to $230 US, so one of those might be worth snapping up while stock lasts. Though, small disclaimer, I've never ever used that memory, so I can't speak to its quality. As for whether or not you should try the single module strategy and then upgrade with a second cheaper module in the future, it's entirely up to you. You could save around $100 US on your build, depending on which memory you go with, so it is certainly a viable option. It's worth being aware, though, that any memory you buy now may not be available in the future, and pairing different modules can be a little bit dicey if you're not willing to go into the BIOS and manually dial in all the primary, secondary, and tertiary timings. Generally speaking, the gaming performance when using a single channel configuration with an individual 16GB memory module was pretty good. We didn't run into any scenarios where frame rates were significantly degraded to the point that it compromised the experience, resulting in poor, unplayable performance. It's also worth keeping in mind, given that this is meant to be more of a temporary solution, that the performance drop-off seen at 1080p isn't that important, and in this example, what we're seeing at 4K is actually more relevant. So the complete opposite of a normal CPU test, because you're not buying this for the future, you're actually buying it as a make-do solution for right now. Realistically, those looking to save money just want to ensure they can actually play the games with a single 16GB stick of RAM. That said, there is minimal risk with this sort of strategy. If you plan on buying a single stick now and find that performance isn't satisfactory, it's a very solvable problem. You just have to bite the bullet and purchase a second stick. Like I said, though, you could run into some stability issues with this strategy if the modules end up being different revisions. I guess one option, though, would be if you have a mate or some sort of friend or family member who's looking at also building a PC, you could buy just a single dual channel kit now, so two 16GB sticks for 32GB capacity, put one module in each system, and then when the memory pricing comes back down to earth, you could buy another kit at a cheaper price and go halves on that kit as well. So that way, one system will have matched memory and the other system will have matched memory, and you shouldn't have any stability problems. So that would be one way to get around that. But of course, you do need a friend who's also in the market for a new gaming PC or some sort of upgrade. Anyway, that is going to do it for this video. It's a different one. As I said, viewer requested. I found it quite interesting. Not really just a single channel versus dual channel thing or 32 versus 16. It kind of combines those things because it's a very odd, unique situation. Anyway, if you enjoyed the video, give it a like, subscribe for more content. We also have the join button or Patreon if you'd like to become a Harbour Unboxed member. That will give you access to our exclusive Discord server, monthly live streams, Q&A stuff, and behind the scenes content. So check that out if you're interested. If not, that's perfectly fine. And I would like to thank you for watching this video. I'm your host, Steve. See you again next time.